This video is going to provide you some background on quadratic functions. Specifically, by the end, I want you to know what the values of a, b, and c do in a quadratic function. So any quadratic function has the form y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. So the a, the b, and the c are called coefficients because they are numbers. The a and the b are numbers sitting in front of the x, hence coefficient. C is a constant because it doesn't sit in front of a variable at all. The graph that's formed from a quadratic function is called a parabola. And each of these graphs is either going to have a maximum point or a minimum point. And also, each of these graphs is going to have a line of symmetry that divides the graph into two halves. So you can see that line of symmetry running straight down the center there. If I folded this graph in half, it would end up on top of the other side. What I'd like for you to do is get out your graphing calculator. And I want you to go into y equals of the graphing calculator. And the first thing that I want you to do is graph y equals x squared and y equals negative x squared. And I want you to make a hypothesis. What do you think the sign of A does to the graph of the quadratic? Once you think you've got it, I want you to graph two more equations. We're going to go with the y equals 4x squared minus 2. Rather than jumping straight to the negative, though, I want the next one that you graph to be y equals 2x squared minus 2. That'll keep it a little cleaner in terms of knowing exactly what that value is doing. So go ahead and graph where you see the two blue check marks and make a hypothesis. What does that number sitting in front of x squared actually do? You should have an idea of what it does when it's positive or negative, but what does the value actually do? Let's summarize what you should have found. If A is positive, the parabola is going to open up. And if the parabola opens up, then that graph is going to have a minimum value. If A is negative, then the parabola opens down. And if the parabola opens down, we're going to have a maximum value. The last part that you just looked at was whether or not the absolute value of A was less than 1, or whether the absolute value of A was greater than 1. When the absolute value of A is greater than 1, the bigger that absolute value gets, the more narrow the graph appears. And if the absolute value of A is less than 1, so those are your fractions, then those parabolas appear wider. So if we have y equals negative 4x squared versus y equals negative 2x squared, the negative 4x squared is going to be more narrow. And you can think about that like being a string that's getting pulled in further and further to the y-axis because it's reaching up higher. Here's a nice visual of what the value of C does to a graph. So we can see in the graph here and the graph here with the red check marks that the negative has flipped it so that it's opening downward. When we look here at the graph with the blue check mark, plus 3 has moved that vertex up 3. And down here, with this blue check mark, minus 2 has moved that vertex down 2. So C is what moves the graph up and down. Let's do a short summary. When A is positive, the graph is going to open up. When A is negative, the graph is going to open down. When C is positive, the graph is actually going to move up, and when C is negative, the graph is actually going to move down. So let's see if you can understand the A and the C by looking at this diagram. The diagram gives graphs for 3 of these 4 quadratic functions that you see here. On the side of the screen now, I would like for you to choose the one that you do not see. Once you do that, I want you to determine of the ones that are there, Which equation do they match with? This covers the basics of quadratic functions. Let's move on and grow this a little bit.